My name is Jim Miles. I'm a retired Chief Warrant Officer W4 from the United States Army. I'm Pat Miles' older brother. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm also an Iraqi war veteran. I served in Vietnam in the Mekong Delta from February 69 to February 70. And I served in Iraq 2 tours in 2004 and again in 2005. My primary MOS was in Vietnam. I served with the 271st Assault Support Company as my primary mission was medevac recovery and downed aircraft recovery. And in Iraq, I served as a medevac pilot and also worked in the Division Safety Center my first tour for the 1st Infantry Division at Forward Operating Base Danger in Tikrit. And my second tour was with the 42nd Infantry Division at Forward Operating Base Speicher, which both of them were about 80 miles north of Baghdad. Speicher is just a little bit south of Mosul, up in the northern provinces. I was in Vietnam from February 69 to February 70. I served with the 271st. They were in the Mekong Delta on the south shore of the Mekong River, about 90 miles southwest of Saigon. During that time, my primary mission was flying the Chinook, was to go out and pick up downed aircraft, primarily Hueys and Cobras that had been shot down. And then when I was flying Hueys, I also flew medevac missions, going out and picking up wounded soldiers. And I arrived in country in February, and I've given several talks on my tours, and for some of the questions that I get asked repeatedly, first of all, was what was my first impression of Vietnam. When we landed at Tan Son Nhut in February, it was in the middle of the afternoon. We'd left San Francisco the night before, and we'd flown to Anchorage, Alaska, and refueled, and then we had flown to Yokota, Japan, and refueled, and then landed at Tan Son Nhut and taxied up to the gateway there. And as I'm walking down the center aisle of the aircraft to get off to deplane and go in the tarmac there in the terminal, the temperature on board the aircraft had been comfortable, about 70, 75 degrees, but about 10 foot from the front door, you get hit with this super hot air. It was about 100 degrees out that afternoon. And the thing that really surprised me was the smell, because Saigon's only about 10 feet above sea level. So there's very few facilities for sewer systems in the area. So about 75 or 80% of the people, the sewer system is just an open ditch alongside of the road. So between the 100 degrees, the 100% humidity, and the sewer smell, by the time I got to the bottom of the stairs to get off the airplane, I was sick to my stomach. I was already sweating like a hog, and still had to get over to the tarmac and get into the terminal, which was not air conditioned or anything. So that was pretty much my welcome to Vietnam. For about 2 days, I was absolutely sick to my stomach just from the smell of the place. But they transported us over to Long Binh and processed us in, and that took about 4 days. And they were going to bus us over to Ben Hoa to fly us out to our various units and stuff. And I was headed down to the 271st, so we got on. There was 4 bus loads of us, and we left Long Binh, and we were going. Long Binh's on the east side of town, and Ben Hoa was out by the airport on the west side of town. So it was about a half-hour drive, and each bus had one guard on board with a loaded M16. It was the only weapons we had on board. Well, just as luck would have it, we got halfway between the 2 bases, and Tet 69 started. the Viet Cong had hit both Bien Hoa and Long Binh. They started with rockets and mortars and small arms fire and sniper fire. And we basically did. At the time, going down the road, we didn't have much trouble. But as we got over to Bien Hoa, they had the gate barricaded because they were afraid of a ground attack. So they had to unbarricade the gate and get us all in under mortar and rocket fire. And we got us all through the gate. And the fourth bus, I was on the third bus, the fourth one right behind me, took an indirect hit. Shrapnel pierced the side of the bus and wounded several soldiers. They brought us up to a group of Quonsets and stuff that we hurried up and ran in, sandbag huts and stuff, and we spent the night in there under mortar and rocket fire. And then the next morning, as the ground attack finally let up, they started processing us. And 3 days later, I flew out to my unit down on the Mekong. I spent my year down there. I had a lot of interesting missions. I had an opportunity to fly the entire length of Vietnam. About 3 months into my tour, we had 2 of our aircraft get shot up real bad, and they had a sapper attack one night and hit 2 of our. We had 12 aircraft at the time. They hit 2 of them, and they basically exploded. Well, this was in the south side of the way, pretty much on the southern edge of the country of Vietnam. Well, 101st Airborne were just getting rid of their B model Chinooks. They were getting the new C models. So there was 3 crews of us went to got on board a Caribou aircraft, and they flew us clear up to Hue Phu Bai, and we picked up 3 of their B models that they were getting rid of, and we got to fly them along the entire coast of Vietnam. So I was wisely advised to always carry a camera over there. So I did get some really nice pictures of the coastline and some of the mountainous areas, and it really was a beautiful country. The Central Highlands and the northern part of the country were just absolutely really beautiful. There's triple canopy jungle and a lot of mountains and stuff, and it really was a pretty sight. It'd be hard to tell there was a war going on, except that every once in a while you got shot at. So I spent my year there. The first time I got shot down was I went in, brought a Chinook in to pick up a Cobra that had been shot down, and it was about 30 miles outside of Can Tho. And as we approached the area where we started looking for the downed Cobra, we noticed that there were 2 pair of Cobras working out tree lines and stuff, and a lot of smoke coming from this general area. So we had a pretty good idea that, yeah, that was it. And then our command and control ship started vectoring us into where the Cobra was. And we had a pair of Cobras on either side of us that were working the tree lines and blowing stuff up over on each side of us. Well, we flew in and hovered over the top of the downed Cobra and carried it up and picked it up and hoisted it up above the trees. The advantage of a Chinook was that it was strong enough to fly itself, plus it could fly a slung load aircraft underneath it. And that's what we were doing. And we just got up over the tree line on our way out of the LZ when my right door gunner started screaming that he'd been hit and that he was in a lot of pain. He was screaming on the intercom there. And when I looked back, my flight engineer was just laughing himself sick back there. He was rolling back there, trying to stay on his machine gun and return fire. So I asked, what's going on down there? And the kid that got hit was saying that he'd been hit. He'd been shot in the butt, but he was afraid to look. And so we managed to get up to Dong Tam, which was an old air base not too far away, and it was a secure area. So we put the Cobra down, and then we landed alongside it. And we weren't very far from Saigon, so we had called for medevac. And we sat down beside the Cobra there and shut everything down and started looking to see how bad he was hit and everything. And what had happened was he was manning his M60 out the right side of the aircraft, and he was returning fire, and a bullet had come up between his legs up through the floor, and a piece of the floor had put a pimple on his butt. He never did take a bullet, but he was a little fat Jewish kid, and he was really bashful and shy. Well, medevac showed up from Saigon, landed alongside us, and this really good-looking little donut dolly, this nurse come running over there with her medic kit, and okay, who's hit? And the kid that got shot wouldn't drop his pants so she could take a look at it. He wasn't going to have any of it. Well, I had a great big black crew chief named Neighbors, and he put the kid down, took his pants off, and dropped him right there on the ramp of the Chinook, and all she got in her little bag and put a little Band-Aid on his butt, and we thought that was the end of it. But the guy flying the medevac bird out of Saigon was a full bird colonel. And so we went over, thanked him for his service and for everything doing. I says, if you don't mind, we'd like to get out of here and get back to base. And he says, you can go. But he said, that kid's coming with me. He says, I don't go out on medevac missions without bringing a patient back. So they had to medevac him back up to Saigon, and he went home with a Purple Heart. And he never shed a drop of blood on it. All he got was a pimple on his butt. That was the first time. And then I went down 2 other times, one out on the Cambodian border, where we simply couldn't stay in the air anymore. We went down once in Rockjaw. Took a bullet up through the top of the aircraft and took out one of our drive shafts. So, and then the other one was on the west coast of Four-Corps, and way down in the Delta there were some mountains that we assaulted, and we took a bunch of fire there and went down. And that aircraft, as far as I know, is still there because the Cobras came in and blew it up after everybody got out. So I was in Vietnam. I left there in February of 1970, and then I came home for 30 days, and then I went to Europe for a year. I could have my choice after Vietnam, I could have my choice of places to go, and I wanted to be a flight instructor at Fort Rucker, but all the slots were full at that time, so my second choice was Europe. So I went to Katterbach Airfield near Ansbach, and I flew with the 349th Aviation Company, flew Hueys for about 10 months. And then in January of 1971, the Army came out with a deal. The war had been winding down, and had started taking, especially pilots and everybody else, they had started withdrawing troops from Vietnam, and they had a whole bunch of extra helicopter pilots they didn't know what to do with. So they gave us an option that we could either take a direct commission to captain and give up flying and accept a ground assignment, or we had to get out. So it took me about all of 3 seconds to tell them that I wanted to get out. So 2 days later, I had orders ordering me back to the States and back to my hometown. My folks were living up in Millette at the time. So I went back there, and I met my future wife there, and we ended up getting married. And then a year after that, there were some openings at a local National Guard unit out in Rapid City, a medevac unit. So I applied, and I was accepted out there. And I flew with them for several years, just local disaster relief and training missions and things like that, VIP runs. Then we got busy. We started having children, and the schedule started crowding up on us. So I ended up transferring to the reserves for several years. And then as the kids got older and started going away and getting their own families and stuff, I only had a few years left to get my good 20 years in. So I reapplied to the medevac unit out in Rapid, and I was once again accepted. So I went back and flew with them. And then in 2002, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and that led to my immediate grounding. So I had that was a grounding, and then the surgery to remove my prostate was also a grounding. So I had 2 groundings on my record. So they transferred me to the reserves, and the minute it took them about 6 months to get my records down there, and the minute the reserves saw that I was a medevac pilot, they called me at home and they said they would give me a waiver for my cancer, and they'd give me a waiver for my surgery, and they would put me back on flight status if I agreed to go to Iraq for a year. And at that time, we had a long talk with my wife and kids and stuff, and we figured that I was close enough. I only had a couple of years left to get my retirement from the military. So I agreed and went ahead and agreed for have them send me the orders and stuff. So in July of '04, I was sent to Baghdad, and then I was reassigned up to FOB Danger up in Tikrit with the 1st Infantry Division. And then I flew medevac there and worked in the safety office when I wasn't on standby. And then the 1st Infantry Division got transferred back to Europe about 6 months through my orders. So my orders got canceled, and then I got reestablished, and I was assigned to the 42nd Infantry Division, their replacement, over at Camp Spiker. So I got credit for 2 combat tours of duty in Iraq. And a lot of people have been asking me about what were some of the commonalities between flying in Iraq and flying in Vietnam. And the biggest difference that I could find was in Vietnam we had a lot of draftees, a lot of kids who didn't want to be there, who got back home, got in a bunch of trouble, and the judge told them they could either go to jail or go to Vietnam, and they chose Vietnam. So there was a lot of discipline problems, a lot of attitude problems, and there was overall very, very low morale. Whereas in Iraq, the draft no longer existed, and I served with 2 units who, both the 42nd and the 1st Infantry Division, that were 100% volunteers. The kids wanted to be there. They accepted the training. They did their keep up. They did their jobs to the best of their ability, and it was actually for the most part was a real enjoyable trip over there. So I was in Iraq for 2 tours. I returned to the States in July of '05, and returned. I was given 1 year's suspension back into the reserves before they would ask me to sign up for another tour. So in 2006, I got a letter saying I either had to go back for a 3rd tour or I had to retire, and I had just finished accumulating enough points to where I could retire. So in 2000, and finally, by the time when they got the paperwork and everything finalized in January of 2008, I retired from the United States Army, got my pension, and was good to go. In 2012, one of the other questions I get asked a lot was a lot of Vietnam veterans suffer health issues years after their tour over there, and I keep getting asked if I have received any health issues, and I'd already had prostate cancer, and in 2012 I slipped and fell on the ice outside of the house here, and landed on my back, and I crushed my T9 vertebrae, and when they MRI'd it, they saw that it had a big old tumor on it. So that would be the 2nd time I was diagnosed with cancer. They went in and took out my vertebrae, and they put in a steel titanium spacer. They also took out my left rib associated with that vertebrae. And then they radiated me 26 times to make sure they had killed all the cancer. And then 10 months later, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. So that time I got 26 chemo treatments, and then I ended up with a bone marrow transplant in 2014. Since then, I've been on various chemo drugs and continue to be treated for for the bone marrow or for the multiple myeloma cancer. Other than that, I'm retired from the local fire department here. I'm retired from the Army, so I spend my days out in my woodshed making toys for my grandchildren, and occasionally get invited to speak at schools and stuff. And overall, right now, life is going pretty good for me. So that's about it. I think that's all you want.